Right now, in a laboratory in Lima, Peru, scientists are trying to grow this vegetable on Mars. Not a metaphor, not a joke. NASA and a team of researchers packed soil from one of the driest deserts on Earth, soil built to mimic the surface of another planet, and planted a potato in it. Some of the most advanced minds in the world are betting a piece of humanity's future on a plant that 300 years ago was illegal to grow in France. A plant people once believed caused leprosy, a plant fed only to prisoners and pigs. So how did the most feared vegetable in Europe become one of the most important crops in the world and possibly the first food grown on another planet? This is the story of the potato. Our story starts high in the Andes Mountains near Lake Titicaca more than 7,000 years ago. At 12,000 feet, almost nothing grows easily. Thin air, freezing nights, brutal sun in the day. But in that unforgiving ground, indigenous farmers found a strange plant with swollen roots, wild potatoes. There was a problem. Wild potatoes were bitter. Some were toxic, packed with compounds called glycoalkaloids, the plant's own natural defense system. Eat the wrong one and you could get seriously sick. So the Andean people did something remarkable. Generation after generation, they selected the least bitter, least toxic plants and bred them. Slowly, a wild, poisonous root became food. But they didn't stop there. At those altitudes, night temperatures can drop to nearly -20 degrees Celsius. Instead of fighting the cold, Andean farmers used it. They spread potatoes on the ground overnight to freeze, then trampled them under bare feet to press out the moisture, then let the sun dry what was left. The result was chuño, a potato that could last for years without rotting. They had invented freeze-drying by hand thousands of years before modern science figured out how to do the same thing in a lab. This wasn't luck, this was engineering, and it's why high in those mountains an empire was about to rise on the back of a root vegetable. When Spanish conquistadors reached the Andes in the 1530s, they found a plant unlike anything back home. They carried it across the Atlantic, and Europe took one look at it and panicked. Here's why. The potato wasn't mentioned anywhere in the Bible. It didn't grow from a seed like everything else people trusted. It grew from a buried, gnarled lump. And botanically, it belonged to the nightshade family, the same family as deadly nightshade, one of the most poisonous plants in Europe. Put those three things together, and a lot of people in the 1600s reached the same conclusion. This plant was cursed. Some believed it caused leprosy because a knobby, discolored potato looked to them like a diseased limb. In several countries, it was considered fit only for livestock. In France, growing it for human food was formally against the law. That's right, not a lack of interest, an actual ban. For nearly a century, one of the most nutritious, easiest to grow foods on the planet sat outside French farms because nobody could get past the fear. Then one man who had eaten almost nothing else for 3 straight years decided to change everyone's mind. Martian, and his potato obsession didn't start in a lab. It started in a Prussian prison camp. During the 7 Years' War, Parmentier, a French army pharmacist, was captured and held for 3 years. His captors fed the prisoners potatoes day after day because it was cheap and available. Parmentier expected to get sick. He didn't. He came home healthy and obsessed with a single question. If this poisonous plant kept him alive for 3 years, what if everyone had been wrong? He spent the rest of his life trying to prove it. He published research. He hosted lavish dinners built entirely around potato dishes, inviting the most influential people in Paris. Even Benjamin Franklin sat at his table. Slowly, the ban was lifted in 1772. But convincing scientists wasn't enough. He needed the public. So Parmentier ran one of the earliest and cleverest marketing campaigns in food history. Baited a lure. King Louis XVI granted him a plot of land outside Paris. Parmentier planted it with potatoes and then hired armed guards to protect the field in plain view of everyone. Here's the twist. He told the guards to look the other way if anyone tried to steal from it. The logic was simple. If something needs guards, it must be valuable. Locals started sneaking in at night, stealing the priceless potatoes and planting them in their own gardens. He topped it off with theater. Parmentier gave potato flowers to the king and queen. Louis XVI wore one in his lapel. Marie Antoinette wore one in her hair. Overnight, the poison plant became fashionable at the French court. One stubborn man, a prison sentence, and a staged theft rewired an entire country's relationship with food. While France was slowly falling in love with the potato, across the sea, one country had already gone all in: Ireland. For struggling tenant farmers working tiny plots of poor land, the potato was almost magic. It grew where wheat couldn't. It produced more food per acre than nearly any other crop, and it provided enough calories and nutrients that a family could survive, sometimes almost entirely on potatoes alone. By the early 1800s, the Irish poor weren't just eating potatoes. Many of them were eating little else, and most of them were growing the exact same variety, the Irish lumper. One crop, one variety, feeding millions of people. It was efficient, it was reliable, and it was, without anyone realizing it, one of the most dangerous gambles in agricultural history. In 1843, near the port of Philadelphia, farmers noticed something strange. A mold-like disease was destroying potato plants from the inside out. Leaves blackened, tubers rotted in the ground. Nobody thought much of it at the time. 2 years later, in 1845, the same disease appeared across the Atlantic, in Ireland. The pathogen was called Phytophthora infestans, and because almost every Irish farmer was growing the same genetically identical variety, the lumper had no defenses. What killed one plant could kill them all. In 1845, the blight destroyed up to half of Ireland's potato crop. The next year, it took nearly 3/4. For a population that depended on this one plant to survive, that wasn't a bad harvest, it was a catastrophe. Over the next few years, roughly 1 million people in Ireland died from starvation and the diseases that followed it. Roughly another million left the country entirely, packed onto ships bound for Britain, Canada, Australia, and the United States. Ireland's population dropped by as much as a quarter. It has never fully recovered. A single vegetable, the same one that had lifted Ireland out of hunger for generations, had become the reason so many were forced to leave or didn't survive at all. But for the ones who crossed the ocean, a new chapter of the potato story was just beginning in America.
Arrived. In 1719, a group of Scots-Irish Presbyterian families settled in a small town in New Hampshire, what's now Londonderry. They planted potatoes in their new gardens, becoming the first lasting potato patch in North America. For most of the next century, Americans were skeptical too. Many still saw the potato as animal feed, not dinner. Change came slowly, crop by crop, region by region. It wasn't until 1836 that a group of missionaries began growing potatoes in a place called Idaho, and it wasn't until 1872 when a new variety called the Russet Burbank arrived that Idaho's potato industry really took off. That single variety, bred for the volcanic soil and cold nights of the American West, would go on to become the backbone of an entire American industry. Today, Idaho alone produces billions of pounds of potatoes a year. The same crop that once nearly destroyed Ireland had found new ground an ocean away, and this time protected by genetic diversity and modern farming instead of a single fragile variety. From that soil came French fries, mashed potatoes, potato chips, and eventually one of the most recognizable foods on the planet, served at drive-thrus from coast to coast. Today, in Lima, Peru, not far from where this story began, sits a facility called the International Potato Center. Inside, scientists preserve more than 4,500 varieties of potato, purple ones, yellow ones, tiny ones the size of a marble. It's the largest collection of potato genetic diversity on Earth, a living insurance policy against exactly the kind of disaster that hit Ireland in 1845. And that same research center did something that sounds like science fiction. Working with NASA, they brought in soil from one of the driest, harshest deserts in Peru, soil considered the closest match on Earth to the surface of Mars. They built a sealed chamber to recreate Martian atmospheric conditions, and they planted a potato inside it. The early results were positive. Potatoes could sprout, even in conditions designed to simulate one of the most hostile environments in the solar system. The same plant that Europeans once refused to grow out of fear is now one of the leading candidates for the first humans who might one day live on another planet. Here's what we know for certain. The potato was domesticated in the Andes thousands of years ago by farmers who turned a toxic wild root into a global food source. It was feared and banned in parts of Europe. One man's stubborn campaign, built on a prison sentence and a staged theft, helped change that. It built up and then devastated Ireland. It quietly took root in America and became part of the identity of an entire nation's food. And today, it's being tested as a potential food source for Mars. What we don't know yet is whether that Mars experiment will ever go further than a lab in Lima, whether a potato could actually survive the radiation, the cold, and the thin atmosphere of the real Martian surface, not just a simulation of it. That part of the story hasn't been written. It began as a bitter, toxic root high in the Andes that almost nobody would eat. It became a food so essential that its failure could empty a country, and a food so trusted that it might be humanity's first meal on another world. 10,000 years, 6 continents, and possibly one day a second planet.
If the plant we once called poison could end up feeding us on Mars, what does that tell us about everything else we've been too afraid to try? This is the history of the potato.